Earlier this year, news broke that the Turtles from the 1987, 2003, 2012, Rise, Mirage, and IDW series would cross paths in the pages of Saturday Morning Adventures. However, fans' high expectations were deflated once they understood things weren't exactly as they seemed. That is, until the final chapter provided them with some much-awaited fan service. Today, I will dive into the twisted story of the Ogglympics. Mr. Og was a supernatural being from Dimension Z, who had powers similar to those of Mr. Mxyzptlk from the Superman mythos. Pronunciations may vary. Mr. Og had gained a powerful resentment for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles after they had tricked him into returning to his dimension. He had later reappeared in the pages of the Saturday Morning Adventures comic, where he'd put the Turtles on trial for breaking the fourth wall too often. The Turtles tricked him into returning to his dimension in the end. The other character you should know about is Creepy Eddie, a Freddy Krueger parody from a place between dimensions named Nightmare Land. Eddie had almost escaped into our world thanks to a malfunction in one of Donnie's inventions. He also returned in the Saturday Morning Adventures pages, where he had tried to trap the Turtles in Nightmare Land again. But after sounding too much like Freddy Krueger, he was defeated by a lawyer. Both characters had access to the rest of the Turtleverse, and while you don't need to read those stories to understand the Ogglympics, they help in understanding the tone of this trilogy. This trilogy was written by Erik Burnham, with art by Sarah Meyer, colors by Luis Antonio Delgado, and letters by Ed Dukeshire. It was published in issues 12 to 14 of the Saturday Morning Adventures from April to June 2024. If you're unfamiliar with this book, it takes place between seasons 7 and 8 of the original cartoon. While there were some continuity accidents, the stories are set in the show's canon, similar to how the IDW Ghostbusters comic took place in the same universe as the movies and video games. The book started with a 4-issue miniseries to test the waters. Erik Burnham, Tim Laddie, and Sarah Meyer smartly opened it with a story where the Turtles faced many of their enemies and allies in a virtual reality game, a perfect pretext to let the readers see the potential of an ongoing series. Of course, all those cameos were just video game versions of the characters, not the actual characters. This story opens with Mr. Og complaining about not having anything good to watch among all the modern remakes, sequels, and adaptations. Then, perhaps channeling the writer and editor of the book, he made a point about the Turtles not being exploited enough, almost as if justifying the existence of the comic you were reading. But after that, he started channeling some die-hard fanboys, complaining about the Turtles breaking the fourth wall all the time, wishing they were like the original version, serious, tough, and color-coordinated. That was when he was convinced by a little devil version of himself that he shouldn't let the Turtles get away with that, and he devised a revenge plan. The story then jumped to the streets of New York, where the Turtles were fighting against a mysterious man-goat mutant with a soundwave weapon called Billy Boom. After defeating him, the Turtles were surprised by a little boy asking for their autographs. He was actually Mr. Og in disguise. The whole fight was a setup so that the brothers could unknowingly sign a waiver agreeing to participate in the Ogglympics, a gauntlet of 3 challenges. They needed to win at least 2 rounds while being entertaining. But losing had grave consequences. They'd be erased from existence. Leo then asked what would happen if they won. Thinking it would be impossible, Og promised to give up his power. Starting from Dimension Z, Og sent the Turtles through a tunnel to their first challenge, fighting an invulnerable and unbeatable dragon in a cave. To Mikey, this challenge didn't make any sense. Mr. Og had promised he would play fair, so that meant there was a way to win. Donnie dismissed Mikey's thought, reminding him that when facing powerful enemies, it was always important to think 3 moves ahead. This gave Mikey an idea. If the villain expected them to think 3 moves ahead, they wouldn't see the move right in front of them. Mikey turned to the dragon, completely transfixed by his dancing moves. Once it was completely engaged, Mikey knocked it out. The other Turtles didn't understand what happened, so Mikey explained that the key was in Og's choice of words. He had said that they had to win at least 2 rounds while being entertaining. Annoyed at the Turtles, Mr. Og took them to a stadium, where he told them they always had the advantage of being the story's heroes, and therefore had an edge to win. But this time they would lose that edge by fighting other heroes. The original Leonardo, Donatello from the 2003 universe, Michelangelo from the 2012 universe, Raphael from the Rise universe, and Jennika from the IDW comics. Mr. Ogg couldn't hold his excitement. Despite the fight being 4 against 5, he announced the challenge would go like a dream. The team with the first KO would win the round. Upon hearing complaints about the teams not being evenly matched, he said that being the underdogs was part of the challenge. Leonardo, assuming the other turtles were heroes like them, considered not fighting against them. Then Ogg forced his hand by telling him that if he refused to fight, he would erase the other team from existence. An absolute nightmare scenario. To the turtles' surprise, Mr. Ogg separated them into different locations. The Mikeys were sent to Neo Tokyo, the Donnies to a Star Wars-like flagship, Raphael 87 and the original Leo to prehistoric times, and Leo 87 and Jennika to a snowy landscape. Leonardo tried to reason with Jennika, but soon discovered that she was too set on winning the match. In prehistoric times, the contrast between the original Leonardo and the 1987 Raphael couldn't be more jarring and funnier. Their fight was briefly interrupted by dinosaurs, which Leo had no problems dispatching. The Donnies were too clever for this situation. They figured out they couldn't cheat without the other noticing it, so they decided not to continue their fight, hoping one of their teammates would prevail. Finally, the Mikeys realized they weren't given a time limit, so they decided to walk around and try Neo Tokyo's pizzas. But it was all a trap. Mikey 2012 simply lulled Mikey 87 into a false sense of security to try to make it easier for them to win. That's when Mikey 87 remembered there were 5 of them on the other team. Rise Raph showed up and knocked out Mikey. This caused our main heroes to lose the round. Seeing how the round was over, Leo demanded Ogg to free the other turtles. But then it was revealed that crossovers took up too much paperwork, so those turtles were simply figments of their imagination. Ogg reached out to Creepy Eddie to impersonate other dimensional turtles that couldn't be convinced to join forces. Unfortunately, Eddie was then freed and bent on destroying them. But this wasn't the time for the turtles to get destroyed. They were in a tie, so Ogg canned Eddie so they could move on to the final round. He took the first issue of the miniseries, the one where the turtles fought virtual reality versions of their enemies, and decided to remake that fight, for real this time, by invoking villains from their past, present, and future. There may have been hidden villains in the last round, but these were the rogues that appeared on panel. Baxter, Zed, Zorax, Lord Dreg, Rat Queen, Krang in an android body, Chrome Dome, Tempestra, Alpha 1, Shredder, Gans, Slash, a Triceraton, Bebop, Rocksteady, Wingnut, Screwloose, Toka, Razar, Tiger Claw, a Crathaddragon, Scumbag, Anthrax, Groundchuck, Dirtbag, the Rat King, and Leatherhead. Like you, the Rat King also noticed a brand new character to this universe, the Rat Queen. After hearing her name, he started considering making her his queen. The thought was quickly punched away by the Rat Queen. Finding herself in this odd situation and not knowing who these Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were, she decided to make the best of it. But when Ogg heard she hadn't met the turtles yet, he sent her back from where he took her. Don't worry, she'll come back in the next storyline. A big fight took place, which should sound like terrible odds for the turtles, but it wasn't really. Mikey realized the villains were taking turns to fight them instead of ganging up on them. After hearing this, Leatherhead decided that was a better strategy. The other villains followed his lead, despite Shredder advising against it. With everyone rushing to the fight, the villains started getting on each other's nerves, and a brawl was unleashed, villain against villain. Shredder, Krang, Lord Dreg, and a Triceraton weren't so dumb and went against the turtles. Now, you probably remember me mentioning that this story took place between seasons 7 and 8 of the original cartoon. That meant the turtles hadn't met Lord Dreg yet. Sure, they also hadn't met Gans, but perhaps April told them about him. I'll talk about that story some other day. Raph then joked about Shredder probably being angry, knowing he would be replaced in the show by another arch-nemesis. Shredder replied that it wasn't a problem for him, as they wouldn't live to see that future. After hearing this interaction, Donatello declared they had already won. Ogg used a Zach Morris-inspired timeout to stop the fight. Donnie then explained that if they were facing villains in the future, they must have won this battle, as those villains wouldn't be here if they had been wiped out of existence. Outraged by the semantics of the situation, Ogg went to talk to the creative team behind the book: Dan Schoening, Erik Burnham, Sarah Meyer, and Luis Antonio Delgado. He demanded that the scene be rewritten, as he considered they needed to work harder to avoid being erased from existence. Dan and Sarah then explained that the turtles were too popular to be erased by a B-list character, and that he should just take the L. Ogg returned to the scene and conceded his defeat, but promised to return with a vengeance. Donnie then challenged this, pointing out that Ogg promised to give up his power if he lost. Ogg thought about it and then said he never specified which power he would give up, so he erased his power of recalling every script of every movie made in 14 different dimensions. Another win for semantics. To ensure the timeline wouldn't get all mucked up, he returned all the characters, including the turtles, to where he took them from without recollections of the experience. Back in New York, and with Billy Boom vanished, the turtles felt disoriented. Since the name Creepy Eddie was on his mind, Donatello suspected this may have been his doing. The turtles then went for pizza and back to the lair to have their brains scanned by Donnie, just to be safe. Back in Dimension Z, Ogg received a phone call from the suits, telling him he was being put back on the shelf for a while. Ogg was angry, but he knew it wouldn't be forever. After all, nostalgia sells. The saga ends with a cliffhanger about the next story in the book, introducing a new version of the Pantheon, one with their eyes on the turtles. That includes Scratch. As you can imagine, the guest starring turtles were never meant to be the real deal, but it was an excuse to do something special for the 40th anniversary. After all, the final fight was the actual main event, a moment I'm sure fans have always wanted to see. Unfortunately, news of the guest turtles was revealed too early, and fans started getting their hopes too high for the crossover, even comparing it to the Turtles Forever movie. As baity as this may look, it was only meant to be one cliffhanger, with a twist about it being Creepy Eddie all along in the following issue. Since Eddie had access to the Turtleverse, it all made sense. On his Patreon, and in an interview Erik Burnham gave for Teddy Gaming Reviews channel, he explained that he didn't think Nickelodeon was ever going to give the okay on a story like that, just because they may want to do a similar project in the future. Later, for the Turtle Tracks podcast, he explained that he left the option open for it to be an official crossover, but Nickelodeon and the book editor preferred the Creepy Eddie option. Had this story been an official crossover, the guest turtles would have been taken from any moment in time before meeting the 1987 turtles. There was another good reason not to do a proper crossover. A story like that was worth exploring in a miniseries, not a single issue. Erik then branded this an imaginary crossover. Aren't they all? He also telegraphed the dream element of it all the way. When the fight was promised in the cliffhanger, the last line said, "What a nightmare that is." Then Ogg continued mentioning dreams and nightmares. In other interesting details about this story, the scene in Neo Tokyo is an obvious reference to Blade Runner, a movie starring Harrison Ford, who also played Indiana Jones, the inspiration for Ace Duck. Since Mikey explained that the place reminded him of that movie, and that it starred Ace Duck, we can assume that the character is a stand-in for Harrison Ford. Or maybe I'm reading too much into it. There is one moment in this story where I feel someone might have messed up. In the fight between Leo and Ralph, there's a joke about Leo wearing the wrong mask. This is a reference to the original Turtles all wearing red masks. That was how they were depicted in the first chapter of this story as well, black and white with red bandanas. However, in this particular fight, Leo's depicted in the same way he appeared in Turtles Forever, in black and white with duo-shade tones. So the joke about him wearing the wrong mask doesn't make sense anymore. Unless Raph, a character who always breaks the fourth wall, is referencing other stories. What do you think happened here? In any case, seeing the guest turtles side by side is very impressive. There's a distinct style for each of them. You can notice the cell shading in the 2003 Donnie, the 3D gradients in the 2012 Mikey, the flat, more geometric and noise-shaded Raph from Rise, and, as I already mentioned, an impressive black and white Leo. Another significant detail about this story is the appearance of Tiger Claw and a Cryphadragon. It's unclear if they belong to the past or the future of these turtles, but given that this is referencing a story in the 2012 series, you could technically say that their appearance here is the actual crossover, even if they barely do anything in this story. Whatever your perspective is on imaginary crossovers, there is an upside to it. Because these weren't the real turtles, any line or action that fans could consider out of character is technically justified. And whether it made sense for certain characters to cheat or even win wouldn't matter in the end, given that it was Eddie all along. This is important because so far, the 2 times the Turtles crossed over with other versions, there was always one side that fans considered didn't act as they remembered them. And it was always the 1987 Turtles. The silver lining to the disappointment of not having the real Turtles is that now Nickelodeon knows readers are interested in buying this story. Is this a sign that the crossover maxi series could happen soon? Let me know what you think. Would you have preferred this to have been a real crossover, or are you glad it wasn't? Leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the sewers.